This happened back in the 1980s, when I was still in high school. I'm from a small town in the Midwest, but that's about as specific as I'll get. When I was in my last year of high school, I got a job at a gas station that was on one of the country highways not far from where I lived. I worked there long enough to save up enough for my first car, and the drive was just under 20 minutes. It was one of my best friends who got me the job, because his older brother was one of the assistant managers. The gas station was relatively big for the area. It was one of the main rest stops around there, so there were always at least a few workers there at once. I was working nights, and even then, there would be 3 of us in the store, then another one at the service center. My weekday shifts would start at 7 and go until midnight. I got there one night as usual, and 2 other guys were already there. There was Benny and Dave. Benny was my friend's brother who got me the job, and Dave was an older guy, around 25, and he had worked there since he was in school. They were both alright, and we would hang out and talk most of the night, since there wasn't usually that much to do. Customers tend to come in waves, and in between, there would be some downtime. It usually worked like that for some reason, where there would be an hour of non-stop work, followed by barely anything. This night was no different, so by 10 in the evening, the 3 of us were just hanging out in the back talking. There was a bell on the door, so if anybody came in, then we would rock, paper, scissors for who would go out and help them. The store didn't have security cameras, so we wouldn't know who it was until we went out. Sure enough, when we were in the back area, the bell rang. I was the unlucky one who had to go out, so I got up from my seat, which was actually an upside-down bucket, and I pushed the door open. As soon as I stepped into the store area, I knew something was wrong. There were 3 men in the store. They were all wearing ski masks over their faces. There's only one reason that people would walk into a gas station at night dressed like that. I knew right away that we were being robbed. I had never experienced a robbery before, but the other 2 had told me stories, so I knew it could happen. I froze for a second, then stepped back through the door that I came out of. It was lucky that I made it back before they caught me. When I was back in there, I found Benny, but Dave wasn't there. I would find out later that he had gone to the bathroom as soon as I went out. I told Benny what was happening, but it didn't matter, because soon after, the door burst open, and there were 3 masked men with guns pointed at us. They ordered Benny to his feet, and he quickly got up, and I took a step to be next to my boss. 2 of the men stayed back there with us, and then one of them went back out to the store to keep watch. Benny and I were held there against the wall for a minute when Dave came back. I had a view of the hallway where he was coming from, and as soon as he saw me, he tried to turn around and head back, but one of the gunmen saw him and ordered him over. He didn't try anything heroic, he just joined us against the wall. This all seemed to happen in slow motion, but I think we were back there for less than a minute before they ordered us to come out of the back room. All 3 of us and all 3 of them went back out to the store area, which was empty at the time. Benny went over to the register, and with a gun pointed in his face, he opened it and handed over the cash. He was remarkably calm as he did. To be fair, it wasn't his first robbery. What the robbers might not have known was that there was a silent alarm on Benny's side of the counter. I didn't see him trip it, but I was pretty sure that he did, because why wouldn't he? Just a reminder that it was the 80s, so there was actually a lot of cash, because people used them more back then. After that, the 3 of them ransacked the store and stole a lot of stuff. They left quickly after and went out into the parking lot where a car pulled up. They got in and were gone before we knew it. The cops showed up minutes later, but Benny handled most of it. I was pretty shaken up, and I was just standing on the far end of the store, leaning against a wall. We all had a good enough look at them, other than their faces. Benny did his best to describe everything about them. Since they had not gotten far away, I heard that the cops tracked them down that night, and they were indeed arrested. Here's the really creepy part though. During the incident, I assumed the robbers were older, maybe in their 30s, but since their faces were covered, I didn't know for sure. I later found out that 2 of the 3 men were actually students at my school, and I kind of knew one of them, even though he was a year younger than me. It's crazy to think of why a young high school kid would throw his life away by being part of an armed robbery for a couple $100. I guess it doesn't make much more sense for an older guy to do it. It just really hit close to home when I found out who the robbers were. That kid actually pointed a gun at me. I still don't know if he was prepared to shoot, but the threat was enough to haunt my dreams for many years afterwards. This happened when I was in my early 20s. My boyfriend Miles and I were at another couple's place for dinner. After dinner, we just talked and hung out for some time, so it was getting quite late. At that point, we all decided to watch a movie, so Miles and I offered to go to the store and get some movie snacks. Since it was so late and stores would be closed, our friends told us there was a 24-hour convenience store right across the street from their apartment building. It was about a 5-minute walk. Even though we drove to their place, we decided to walk to the store with it being so close. When we left their building, we walked around the back as our friends instructed. We could see the convenience store right across the street, and we had to cut through a big field. It was winter, and although it was not terribly cold, it was icy. We were very careful as we walked, and as we were walking, we heard a man call out for help from off in the distance to our left. We looked, but couldn't see anyone. It was really dark. The lights from their small apartment building only lit up the immediate area. Miles yelled out, "Is anyone there?" The voice said, "Yes, I slipped on the ice and landed on my back. I think I broke my hip. Please come and help me." He then yelled out, "Who else is with you?" And Miles yelled back, "Just me and my girlfriend." I believe the man could probably see us because we were lit up from the apartment building's lights, but we could not see anything in the dark field. This was before cell phones, so we did not have any light. Miles yelled for him to wave his hands in the air to see if that would help us to see him. He did so, and we saw a faint figure lying on the ground way back in the field. We could barely make him out though, and we discussed what we should do. Miles thought it would be better for us to call for help because it's dangerous to move someone with a possible broken hip or back. Also, to be honest, I was terrified of us going into that pitch black field, and I told Miles that. He yelled out to the man that we were calling an ambulance or police for help. The man's tone immediately changed. It went from distressed pleading to very angry. He screamed at us that calling for help would take too long and that we needed to come now. We thought it was very strange that this man would turn down medical attention. We ran back to the apartment and told our friends. We decided to call the police. The operator said that there was a car in the area and it would be there in 5 minutes. The police reported that they searched the entire field surrounding the area of the apartment building and found no one. How could a badly injured person get up so fast and walk away? It was definitely a setup. I'm so thankful that we didn't go over to him in that dark, scary field. After I finished high school, I got fired from a few jobs, mostly because of some personal problems I was having that led to a few bouts of depression. I was working in sales originally, but I was let go from that job, and I bounced around doing some other things for a while. When none of that worked out, I was unemployed for a few months and very close to ending up homeless. Then one of my friend's moms pulled a favor and got me a job at a 24/7 gas station. That was great for me, but I would have to do the night shift, which was 10 p.m. until 6 in the morning. Since I had never done a night shift before, I wasn't sure if I could handle it, but at the time, I was staying up until 4 in the morning most nights anyway. I lived in an apartment building in an old subdivision, and the gas station was about a 30-minute drive for me, because it was on the outskirts of our town, but there was a highway nearby. My first few shifts were supervised with my boss Jen, who normally worked days. She was covering the night shift before I started, so I was kind of relieving her from that burden. For whatever reason, we really hit it off right away. Maybe she was thankful for me stepping in, or maybe she was just nice. Either way, I was feeling pretty optimistic about the job. It was also quite easy once I learned a few things. I was new to the whole computer system, but it was not that hard to learn. Other than that, it was just basic cleaning and stocking shelves. It also seemed that the place was pretty much completely empty from around 1 in the morning until 4:30, meaning that I didn't even have to deal with customers for almost half the time I was there. However, I did know that Jen would be leaving me alone, so that was a whole nother experience. Other than what I mentioned before, the store on the interior was just 3 aisles, and it was pretty small. The entire space was covered by 3 security cameras, which I could watch from behind the counter. Jen explained to me that we always had to watch for shoplifters, and that was a constant problem. I was a little uncomfortable with that at first, especially when I would be alone. I needed the job though, so I told her I would do it. My first week came and went faster than I would have liked, and after that, I was on the night shift alone. On my first night, I brought a book that I was reading, hoping to put a good dent in it during the few hours that I would likely have to myself. However, by the time the quiet period started, I was feeling too tired to absorb much from it. I tried, but decided to listen to something on my phone instead. At 3 in the morning, the door swung open and a man walked in. I was surprised, because nobody came in that late when I was there with Jen. He had his car at one of the pumps, but the pumps were all self-service, and he had already paid. The man walked straight up to the counter and asked for 2 scratch tickets. I gave them to him and he paid, no problem so far. But then he moved about 2 feet away from me, still in front of the counter. He put the tickets on the counter and then pulled out a large military-style knife from his jacket and used it to scratch the tickets. As he was doing it, he looked up at me and gave me a creepy smile. That was when I noticed that he was missing at least half of his teeth. It felt like a threat, but it wasn't obvious enough that I could really do anything about it, so I tried to ignore him. After he was done, he looked up at me and said, "You better give me a winner next time." Then he pushed the 2 spent tickets back to me and left. Again, there wasn't anything I could do, because it was nothing more than a feeling. The front of the store looked over the parking lot and the pumps, and I watched as the man's car drove away. There was still another 3 hours on my shift, but I knew the morning rush would start in another hour, so after another half hour or so, I decided to take a break. There was a smoking area around the back of the building near the garbage dumpsters. We had a small picnic table back there, and that was supposed to be just for employees. I was allowed to lock up the store for 15 minutes at a time for my break, so I did that and then went to the back for a cigarette. As soon as I turned the corner and the table came into view, I saw a person sitting there, and it was the man with the lottery tickets from before. By the time I saw him, I was barely 10 feet away. Before I could register what was happening, he stood up and came right for me, and I could see that he was holding that big knife in his hand. I backed up quickly and ran back around the building. Then I unlocked the front door, slipped in, and locked it behind me. I was expecting to have to fight the guy off, but when I looked out the front window, I saw him walking up to it casually. Then he smiled at me, walked up to the door, and tried to open it. When he realized it was locked, he looked at me again, and then turned around and walked away. I didn't see where he went, but he must have had his car hidden around there somewhere. I then called the cops, and somehow they sent a car over in less than 5 minutes. So when the cop got there, the man was still in the parking lot. I looked out as they were talking to him, and then he came over to talk to me. I was told that the man denied coming at me with a knife. He admitted to being at the back, but said he didn't have his knife. He even offered to let them search him. They didn't bother, because he could have hidden it by then, so it didn't mean anything. I finished my shift and went home afterwards. The next day, I called in when Jen was working, just to let her know what happened. Even though it was scary, I couldn't afford to lose that job, so I kept doing it. Every single night, though, I was scared that he would come back. To my relief, that still hasn't happened. I was in my 3rd year of high school when this happened, and I was still living with my parents in the same house that I had lived in my whole life. It was in the suburbs, and there were not really any businesses nearby. It was all houses. Our house was orange brick, and it was on the far end of a quiet street. As soon as I could, I started applying for jobs in my city. Like I said, there wasn't anything near my house, but there was a small retail area about a 30 or 40 minute walk away. That would be the closest place where I could actually find work. There was a flower store, a grocery store, and a few restaurants, including some fast food places. There was also a 24/7 convenience store and a gas station. Once I started my job hunt, I passed out resumes to almost every business there. I got a call back from the gas station, but for some reason, my mom wouldn't let me work there. I think she was worried that it would be too dangerous. I also got an interview at the convenience store, and I was able to talk my mom into being okay with that. The interview went well, but I didn't get hired on the spot. About a week later, though, I got a call on a Saturday afternoon to fill in for someone that night. I canceled my plans and went in for training. Several hours later, I was working my first job ever. Luckily, the manager stayed with me the whole time, so it wasn't that hard. By the time it was 10 at night, my new boss finally told me that the shift went until midnight. Since the whole thing was so sudden, I didn't even know what I was signing up for. By around 11, some of the customers were looking pretty sketchy, and most of them looked drunk or on something. I didn't comment anything to my boss, because I was so thrilled to have the job. When it was getting close to midnight, my boss told me that I could go, because there wasn't much else to do. Since it was so late, I didn't want to bother my parents and call for a ride. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, I could feel that it was raining slightly, but not enough to be a problem. The road was shiny with water, and as I walked, I could see the red taillights from the cars reflecting off of it. Even though there was some traffic on the roads, I didn't see any other people walking. That was until I was suddenly approached from behind. I didn't see them coming, but before I knew it, there were 2 guys next to me. I was only 10 minutes away from the store. I was kind of uncomfortable, but they seemed friendly at first. One of them asked me for my name, and then we even shook hands. Even though it was kind of close to my neighborhood, I had never seen these guys before. They were at least 25, and I was 16. Eventually, they started asking personal questions, and I wasn't comfortable answering. Nothing crazy, but one of them asked me where I lived. I tried to keep things vague, but didn't outright lie. They kept following me, and eventually one of them put his hand on my shoulder. Not in a friendly way, but in a way that it seemed like a power move. He left it there for an uncomfortable amount of time, and then I noticed that they nodded to each other. Before I knew it, I was being dragged into an alley off the sidewalk. There was a small space between two buildings, and it was dark with no lights at all. I was being pushed up against the wall of one of the buildings by both guys. They were pressing into me so hard that I could hardly breathe. I don't know if they realized it, but I almost passed out. I could hardly see anything, so I didn't even know if they had a weapon. It wasn't until I felt the cold blade of a knife on my neck that I was sure that my life was in danger. The pressure on my body was still hard, so I couldn't speak at all. One of them started going through my pockets, and at that moment, some of the pressure was taken off of me. When that happened, I took a deep breath and started hyperventilating. They got my wallet, my phone, and even my keys, and then they took my backpack too. I just had a spare set of clothes and nothing else valuable. Once they had those things, they disappeared down the other side of the alley, and I couldn't even see them go. They were simply gone. Since I didn't have my phone, I couldn't even call for help. There was no other choice but to walk the rest of the way home. When I finally got to my house, I had to pound on the door until my dad could let me in. I didn't want to admit that I was robbed, because I was embarrassed for being so stupid, but there was no other way to explain to my dad why my wallet, my keys, and my phone were all gone, so I had to tell him. I was expecting a bit of a lecture from my dad, but he was actually pretty understanding, even though he mentioned that he would have to change the locks on our house. I felt pretty guilty for letting that happen, but soon got over it. So that was my first day of work ever. I actually got robbed for the first time that day as well. The job worked out well for a while, and I was eventually able to afford to move out of my parents' house. After that, I never walked home alone at night again. This happened over 10 years ago when I was a senior in high school. I was driving home late at night from a friend's place, which was quite a distance away in a rural area. The roads to get there were mostly back roads, winding and poorly lit, which made the drive feel even longer and a bit eerie after dark. Despite the isolation, it was a straightforward route and I had taken it many times before, so I was on autopilot, listening to some music and thinking about the evening. It was just a standard evening with some of my closest friends. We didn't drink or anything, so it was pretty low-key. One of my other friends drove as well, and the others lived close to him, so I was all alone on that road. I had my own car by then, even though I was still in high school. It was a piece of crap, but it was good enough at the time. It didn't even have a hookup for a phone or an MP3 player, so I had a collection of CDs for music. As I passed a small lit-up gas station, I glanced at my fuel gauge. It was still more than half full, so I decided not to stop. The station was the last sign of civilization before a long stretch of road surrounded by fields and patches of dense woods. Less than a mile past the gas station, my car jolted suddenly and the steering wheel jerked in my hands. I struggled to maintain control of my car, but it veered off the edge of the road. I managed to bring it to a stop on the shoulder, and when I did, I realized how tense I was. It all happened so fast, and it was over before I knew it. I had blown a tire once before, so I knew before I even got out that that's what it was. Like I said, my car was a piece of crap, but the tires weren't that old, and even though the road was kind of rough, it wasn't bad enough to cause anything like that. There weren't any major potholes or anything. Even though I knew this stretch of road had no cell service, I checked my phone anyway. There was no signal. With a deep breath, I got out, locked my car, and started walking back towards the gas station, hoping they could help. As I was walking, I approached the spot on the road where my tire had blown, and I got curious. I decided to see if I could find what had caused the accident. The beam of light from my phone scanned the asphalt, until it settled on a few odd objects that were scattered around. They looked bizarre, like golf balls, but each one had nails driven through them, and they were painted black. It was clear somebody had placed them there intentionally. I picked up one of the objects with the edge of my jacket, planning to show it to the police. Then I moved a few more of them off the road quickly, hoping to save any other drivers from going through what happened to me. All the while, I didn't even consider whoever had placed them might still be around. About halfway to the gas station, I glanced back down the road and noticed a figure in the distance. Initially, I thought it might have been another stranded driver, but the figure drew closer, and I could see him walking quickly and gaining on me. There was something unsettling about it. I tried to speed up without being too conspicuous, but the person was still coming fast. When I dared to take another look, he had begun to run. My heart raced as I broke into a full sprint towards the gas station. I wasn't a runner back then, and I was honestly a little out of shape, but it didn't seem to matter at that moment. It was pure adrenaline. I sprinted the last stretch to the gas station. The bright fluorescent lights shone in my eyes as I ran through the parking lot. As I reached the entrance, I risked another glance and saw the man was far back behind me. He was walking slowly and even looked like he might turn around. I burst through the door, nearly tripping over the threshold. The lone worker behind the counter looked up, startled by me. I was frantic, out of breath, and probably crying a little, but he might not have even noticed through the sweat. I was gasping for air, and I managed to explain that there was a guy chasing me. Then I asked the worker to call the police. The attendant seemed to take me seriously, a relief, since I knew that I looked and sounded crazy. He locked the front door first, then called the cops from the phone that he had behind the counter. We waited in tense silence until the police arrived. He didn't ask for any more detail, and I didn't care to elaborate. I had still barely caught my breath that whole time. When the police got there, I gave them a quick explanation of what happened. From the blown tire caused by the spiked objects, to the chase that ended up at the gas station. Then I remembered that I had one of the spikes from the road in my jacket pocket. I took it out and showed it to one of the cops. He picked it up with gloves, examining it closely. Then he said that they would sweep the area where I found them, because it looked intentional. They asked if I could describe the man who chased me, but in the panic and the poor lighting, all I could recall that he was average height and average build, nothing that would stand out. While one officer went to inspect the road, the other stayed with me. I tried to remember any detail that could be helpful, but I was feeling frustrated by how little I could provide. After they had all they needed from me, they told me to stay in the gas station for the time being, and then they took off. A while later, I was able to return to my car, and by then, AAA had come to fix my tire. However, when I got back to my car, it was totally trashed. 2 windows were smashed, and a few things were stolen. I had left my backpack in there, and it was gone. Nothing really valuable was in it, but still. They were still able to fix my tire and get me back on the road, though. I made my way home in one piece, but I was pretty upset for a while. All in all, it cost me a couple $100 in losses and damages, but I was really afraid for my life out there. That was such a dangerous way to steal a backpack and a few CDs. Truly senseless.